Imagine standing at the altar, cameras flashing, the world watching, and your bride never shows. The billionaire's daughter disappeared on her wedding day, and the truth behind her vanishing isn't just scandal. It's betrayal, corruption, and a secret so devastating it could destroy everyone. The Harrington estate shimmered under the morning sun like a palace in a fairy tale. Rows of imported roses curved along marble steps, television crews camped outside the gates, and inside, an army of planners rushed to perfect the most extravagant wedding of the decade. Billionaire Richard Harrington had promised nothing less than a spectacle. His only daughter, Ava, would marry into political royalty. But beneath the glitter, cracks had already formed. At 11:47 a.m., just minutes before Ava was to walk down the aisle, panic rippled through the bridal suite. The gown, tailored for months, lay folded on the floor. A veil was draped carelessly across the vanity. And Ava Harrington, the bride the world was waiting for, was gone. At first, whispers spread, cold feet. A runaway bride. But when the staff checked the surveillance monitors, the whispers curdled into something darker. The cameras captured Ava leaving through a service corridor at the back of the estate, dressed not in her silk gown but in plain clothes. She didn't look panicked. She looked determined. Moments later, security found the gown ripped at the seam, discarded near the exit. The torn silk, glistening under the harsh emergency lights, felt less like fabric and more like a message. She wasn't coming back. Richard Harrington stormed through the halls, barking orders. Shut this down. No one outside hears a word until I say so. But it was already too late. A bridesmaid had leaked a text. She's gone. Within 20 minutes, the story exploded across social media. Outside the gates, reporters screamed into microphones. Breaking news, billionaire's daughter missing on her wedding day. Runaway bride or something more sinister? By noon, the Harrington wedding had turned from celebration into a crime scene. The groom, Ethan Ward, stood at the altar as whispers swept the guests. His perfect politician's smile faltered for the first time. He muttered under his breath, unaware of the hot mic clipped to his collar, "She can't back out. Not now. Not like this." For the public it was scandal. For the Harringtons, humiliation. For Richard it was war. He called it a security breach, insisting his daughter had been targeted. But behind his fury something gnawed. Ava had told him once in that quiet, defiant voice of hers, "Sometimes freedom costs everything." And now, with her dress in tatters and her trail cold, the world was forced to ask, had Ava been kidnapped? Had she run away? Or had someone silenced her before she could reveal the truth? As the sun dipped behind the estate and helicopters circled overhead, one fact became undeniable. The billionaire's daughter hadn't just vanished. She had detonated a fuse. And the explosion was only beginning. The headlines called her, the Princess of Steel and Glass. To the world, Ava Harrington lived a life people envied. Penthouses in New York, summers on the Amalfi Coast, cars gifted like toys and a closet of couture. But behind the velvet curtains, her life was scripted by one man, her father, Richard Harrington. Richard liked to remind everyone of his beginnings. He'd grown up in a rotting apartment block on the edge of Chicago, abandoned by a father he despised, clawing his way out of poverty with nothing but grit and an appetite for power. To the public he was a self-made titan. To his rivals he was a thief with a clean suit. To Ava he was a warden dressed as a father. From childhood she learned that her life wasn't her own. Every school she attended was chosen for optics. Every friend she made was vetted for potential. Every smile at charity galas was rehearsed. When she was 16, Ava secretly applied for an art program in Florence. She'd been accepted. But when Richard found the acceptance letter, he ripped it into pieces and said, "You're not here to play with brushes, Ava. You're here to inherit an empire." It wasn't just his words that scarred her, it was the trail of lives crushed beneath his empire. Ava had seen the faces of tenants evicted from their homes, families shattered by one of his developments, employees fired for speaking out. And then there were the rumors. Rivals who suddenly went bankrupt, journalists who disappeared after writing too much. Ava carried those ghosts in silence. She would sit by her window at night, diary open, sketching a life that could never be hers. On one page she had written, "If I'm surrounded by everything, why do I feel like nothing?" At 21 she confronted Richard for the first time. "I don't want this life. I don't want to be you." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't strike her. He simply leaned in and whispered, "You don't get to choose. Not while my blood runs through your veins." From then on, she learned to play her role, the graceful daughter at society galas, the loyal heiress photographed beside her father. But inside she was plotting. Foreshadowing her fate, Ava confided in a childhood maid who had cared for her more than her own parents. One rainy night, as lightning cracked across the sky, Ava whispered, "One day soon I'll finally do something that isn't for him or for his name. It'll be mine, even if it costs me everything." The maid, fearful, begged her not to speak such words. But Ava smiled a sad, tired smile. When the maid saw the news on the day of the wedding, "Billionaire's daughter vanishes," she wasn't surprised. She whispered to herself, "She finally did it." What no one knew yet was that Ava's rebellion wasn't just against her father's empire. It was against the destiny he had chained to her from the moment she was born. If Richard Harrington was the empire, Ethan Ward was the crown jewel meant to polish it. The son of Senator Charles Ward, Ethan had been groomed since birth to embody perfection. Ivy League education, flawless manners, an easy smile that cameras adored. To the public he was a political fairy tale, clean, promising, destined for higher office. But Ava knew the truth behind the smile. Their engagement hadn't been born of love. It was inked in boardrooms over expensive whiskey, a pact between billion-dollar real estate and a political dynasty. A marriage that would bind Richard's empire with the Ward family's influence. Ava was never asked. She was told. Ethan had leaned close at their engagement dinner, whispering through that perfect smile, "Don't worry, Ava. We'll make it work. We don't need love, just power." Behind closed doors, Ethan's mask cracked. He drank too much. He flirted with staff. He shouted when things didn't go his way. His polished speeches about integrity and leadership rang hollow, especially to Ava, who discovered the skeletons hidden under his $1,000 suits. There was the intern who disappeared after rumors of an affair. The campaign donor who whispered about hush money. The late-night phone calls where Ethan's voice, sharp with panic, begged someone, "Keep this quiet. Just make it disappear." Ava had once stumbled on a tabloid draft article buried by his father's political machine, a scandal about a pregnancy that had been handled. The details chilled her. Ethan's smile was a weapon, and the world had fallen for it. The morning of the wedding, Ethan stood before the mirror in his tailored tuxedo, reporters buzzing outside the estate walls. He rehearsed his lines, the charming groom, the loving husband-to-be, the man uniting two dynasties. But as he adjusted his cufflinks, his phone buzzed. He turned away from his groomsmen, lowering his voice. "No, she won't back out. She can't. Not now. If she does, we all burn." The hot mic at the altar wasn't the first time Ethan had slipped. He was reckless in his arrogance, confident that money and politics could smother any fire. But Ava wasn't a scandal to be silenced. She was a storm gathering in silence. Foreshadowing the disaster to come, Ethan had once confessed in a drunken haze to a friend, "They think I'm untouchable. But one wrong move and I'm finished. If she ever talks, if she ever really talks, I'm done." When Ava vanished, Ethan's carefully constructed world began to tremble. Reporters shoved microphones into his face, demanding answers. His smile stayed in place, but his eyes betrayed something darker, not grief, not worry, but fear. The question wasn't just, "Where is Ava Harrington?" It was, what did she know about Ethan Ward, and who else would burn if she spoke? When the news broke, "Billionaire's daughter vanishes on her wedding day," Lena Cruz froze. Her phone buzzed nonstop, colleagues demanding her take as a journalist, her editor urging her to spin the angle. But Lena wasn't just another reporter chasing a headline. She had once been Ava's best friend. Long before cameras and couture gowns, before Richard Harrington's empire swallowed whole city blocks, Ava and Lena had been inseparable. Two little girls who met in elementary school. Ava with her neatly pressed uniforms, Lena with her thrift store shoes. Ava had envied Lena's laughter, Lena had envied Ava's toys, and together they had built a bond that seemed unbreakable. But it had broken. The fracture came when Richard expanded his empire into Lena's neighborhood. Harrington Industries bought the building Lena's family lived in, promising redevelopment for a better future. What it meant was eviction. Lena remembered the night vividly, movers at the door, her father clutching paperwork, her mother sobbing as they were forced out. By dawn, everything they owned was on the street. Weeks later, her father died of a heart attack, crushed by the weight of losing everything. Lena blamed Richard. And she blamed Ava for staying silent. Their friendship didn't survive. Ava had called, written letters, begged to explain, but Lena refused to answer. By the time they were adults, Ava was a socialite caged in privilege, and Lena was a journalist with ink-stained fingers, exposing corruption wherever she could. That was why, when Lena opened the small package that arrived just days before the wedding, her hands shook. Inside was Ava's childhood bracelet, a simple silver chain tarnished from age, and a note, written in Ava's delicate handwriting. "I'm sorry for everything. Soon you'll understand why I can't stay." At the time, Lena had dismissed it as melodrama, the kind of cryptic message a bride with cold feet might send. But now, staring at breaking news banners, she realized it was something else. It was a breadcrumb. Guilt and anger churned inside her. Ava had always been trapped by her father's empire, but she had also been complicit. She had benefited from the very wealth that destroyed Lena's family. And yet, Ava had reached out to her, not to her bridesmaids, not to Ethan, not even to her mother. To Lena. Foreshadowing what was to come, Lena pulled the bracelet onto her wrist and whispered into the empty room. "What did you do, Ava?" Her phone buzzed again, her editor's voice sharp and hungry. "You knew her. This is your story. Dig, Lena. Find the truth. And for God's sake, don't let anyone else get it first." But this wasn't just a story. It was personal. Ava's vanishing had ripped open wounds Lena thought had scarred over long ago. And whether it was justice, revenge, or closure, Lena knew one thing. If Ava had left a trail, she was going to follow it. And the first clue was already clinking softly on her wrist. While Richard Harrington barked at his lawyers and ordered his PR team to control the damn narrative, another man sat in the shadows of a high-rise penthouse, swirling bourbon in a glass. Caleb Vance. If Harrington was steel and glass, Caleb was fire and ruin. The two men had once been partners, building towers that kissed the clouds. But greed devours partnerships faster than profit builds them, and years ago their empire had split in blood and betrayal. Caleb had vowed to destroy Richard, not through lawsuits or market battles, but by tearing apart the very foundations of his legacy. And Ava Harrington was the jewel in that foundation. 4 weeks leading up to the wedding, Caleb's men had tracked her every move. The boutiques she visited, the charities she attended, the unguarded moments when she slipped away from bodyguards to sketch in quiet cafes. She had noticed the shadows, of course. Ava wasn't naive. Sometimes she even stared directly into their cameras as if daring Caleb to make his move. Caleb had admired that. The girl has steel, he thought. More than her father ever did. So when the news broke that Ava had vanished hours before binding her family to the Ward dynasty, Caleb didn't flinch. He simply smirked and muttered, "The princess finally cut her strings." But his advisors weren't convinced. "Did we help her?" one asked nervously. Rumors had already spread in back channels that Caleb had orchestrated her disappearance, that this was his masterstroke to humiliate Harrington on the world stage. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. The ambiguity was more useful than the truth. If people believed he had stolen Richard's daughter, it meant fear. It meant leverage. And yet, privately, Caleb had his doubts. A month earlier, Ava had confronted him in secret. It was late after one of her father's galas. She slipped away from the glittering ballroom and found Caleb waiting in a darkened garden. No cameras. No bodyguards. Just Ava in a sequin gown looking him dead in the eyes. "If I disappear one day," she whispered, "don't claim me. Don't use me. Just know, I didn't do it for you. I did it for me." Her words haunted him now as he stared out over the city skyline. Still, Caleb couldn't resist adding fuel to the fire. He fed anonymous tips to journalists. Whispers of kidnapping, cryptic photos of Ava near his properties. He knew Richard would rage, would send his men, would drag his daughter's name through every headline to prove his innocence. And Caleb relished it. But in the quiet of his penthouse, Caleb wondered, had Ava truly escaped her father's cage, or had someone silenced her before she could? Because if Ava Harrington was dead, then Caleb had lost his greatest weapon. And Richard had lost something far more dangerous, a daughter who finally found her own will. Amid the frenzy at the Harrington estate, journalists clawing at the gates, helicopters circling like vultures, Vivian Harrington sat in her private suite, untouched champagne trembling in her hands. She looked the part of the perfect society matron. Pearls around her neck, an ivory gown tailored to perfection, her face frozen in a porcelain mask of composure. But inside she was unraveling. Vivian had married Richard not for love, but for survival. Her family, once wealthy, had crumbled under debts. Richard swooped in like a savior, charming her parents with promises of security. At first, she believed in him, the hungry boy who clawed his way from poverty, the man who whispered dreams of empires. But those dreams had curdled into nightmares. Behind closed doors, Vivian had learned the cost of Richard's empire: bribes, betrayals, bodies that vanished. And though she hated him, she stayed. She told herself it was for Ava. That by enduring the gilded prison she could shield her daughter from the worst of Richard's wrath. But Ava had grown sharp. Too sharp. Vivian had seen it in her eyes at 16, when Ava slammed her Florence acceptance letter onto the table and said, "I could be free, Mother. Why won't you help me?" Vivian had wanted to say yes. She had wanted to pack a suitcase, take Ava's hand and run. But Richard's shadow loomed. He controlled everything, the money, the security, even the law. If she tried to leave, she knew Richard would destroy Ava to punish her. So she told her daughter what she had told herself for years: "We can't fight him." The day of the wedding, Vivian had tried to play her part. She smiled for photographers, dabbed her eyes during rehearsals, adjusted Ava's veil with trembling fingers. But when she looked into her daughter's eyes, she didn't see joy. She saw a storm. Just hours before the ceremony, Ava had slipped into her suite, her gown half-fastened, her eyes blazing. "I'm not going through with this," she whispered. "Not him. Not Father. None of it. You'll see." Vivian's breath caught. She wanted to stop her, to beg her not to provoke Richard's fury. But instead, she kissed her daughter's forehead, pressed the pearls into her hand and whispered, "Do what I never could." Now, as Richard stormed through the halls and barked orders, Vivian sat motionless, clutching her empty glass. She knew he suspected Caleb, Ethan, anyone but himself. But Vivian knew better. Ava hadn't vanished because of Caleb, or Ethan, or even Richard. She had vanished because Vivian had finally let her go. Foreshadowing the reckoning to come, Vivian whispered into the silence, "Don't come back, Ava. Not until the whole truth is out." And for the first time in 25 years, Vivian Harrington allowed herself to hope. The bracelet clinked against Lena's wrist as she walked briskly through the crowded newsroom. Screens flashed headlines: "Billionaire's daughter missing." "Ward dynasty in crisis." "Rival mogul suspected." Everyone was hungry for scraps of speculation. But Lena wasn't interested in rumors. She wanted the truth. She spread Ava's note on her desk, the words etched in Ava's familiar cursive. "I'm sorry for everything. Soon you'll understand why I can't stay." It wasn't panic. It wasn't fear. It was resolve. Her instinct screamed, Ava hadn't been taken. She had chosen to vanish. Lena began with surveillance footage leaked online. The clip of Ava leaving through the service corridor was grainy, but Lena paused on one frame, Ava's hand clutching a worn leather sketchbook. Lena's chest tightened. That sketchbook had been with Ava since they were children, a place where she drew, yes, but also where she hid her truest thoughts. If Ava had it with her, it meant she was leaving behind more than a wedding. She was leaving behind her silence. Following a hunch, Lena retraced Ava's final week. Boutique fittings, charity luncheons, rehearsals. On the surface, routine. But tucked between those appearances were unexplained gaps. 3 hours unaccounted for on Tuesday. A driver dismissed early on Thursday. A cancelled appointment Friday afternoon. Ava had carved out slivers of freedom inside the suffocating schedule. Lena dug deeper. Phone records showed calls to unlisted numbers. One address appeared more than once. A derelict library scheduled for demolition, ironically by Harrington Industries. Lena's pulse quickened. Why would Ava go there? That night, under a cold drizzle, Lena drove to the site. The library loomed like a skeleton, windows shattered, doors chained. She slipped inside through a side entrance, her flashlight cutting through dust and shadows. And there it was. On the rotting floorboards, half buried under debris, she found fresh chalk markings, Ava's sketches. A series of drawings, a birdcage, bars bent wide open, feathers scattered across the page. Beside it, words scrawled in pencil, "Cages look pretty from the outside until you're the one trapped inside." Lena's throat tightened. Ava had left this here for someone to find. Maybe for her. But the most chilling discovery lay in a corner, a torn photograph. It showed Ava with a group of unknown faces, not society elites, not her father's circle. Ordinary people. Activists Lena recognized from her reporting. Whistleblowers who had once tried to expose Harrington Industries, and paid dearly for it. Ava hadn't just run away. She had been planning something. Aligning herself with people who hated her father as much as Lena once did. Foreshadowing the storm to come, Lena tucked the photograph into her jacket and whispered, "What were you about to do, Ava?" When she stepped out of the library, headlights flashed across her face. A black SUV idled at the curb. A man in a suit rolled down the window and said calmly, "Miss Cruz, stop digging unless you want to disappear too." The black SUV tailed Lena for 3 blocks before peeling away, but the warning rattled her. If someone was watching her, it meant she was getting close. And that meant Ava's disappearance wasn't just a family scandal, it was a trigger. She spread her findings across her tiny apartment floor. Ava's note, the bracelet, the photograph of activists, screenshots of Ethan's buried scandals, whispers of Caleb's involvement. It looked like chaos. But Lena had been a journalist too long not to see the pattern. Every clue pointed to the same rot, Richard Harrington's empire. Digging deeper, Lena uncovered sealed court records. Whistleblowers who tried to expose Harrington Industries' illegal land grabs had been silenced by accidents. A car crash here, a sudden disappearance there. Ethan's father, Senator Ward, had lobbied to shield Richard from scrutiny, in exchange for campaign donations and influence. Ethan himself had been groomed as the clean face of the machine, his scandals covered by Harrington money. And Caleb? He wasn't innocent either. His rivalry with Richard wasn't about justice, it was about control. He wanted to replace Harrington as king of the city's underworld of money and politics. Ava wasn't just a daughter or a bride. She was a pawn trapped between giants. And Lena realized, Ava had vanished not to escape marriage, but to dismantle the whole system. That night, Lena met with an old source, a former Harrington accountant who lived under a false name. He slid a USB drive across the diner table. She came to me, he whispered. Your friend, Ava. She said if anything happened to her, this would explain why. Lena's fingers trembled as she plugged it into her laptop. Files exploded across the screen. Shell companies, bribery trails, blackmail records. But the most damning file was labeled simply, the Ward deal. It outlined a plan for the Harrington-Ward wedding merger. Billions in hidden accounts, land transfers, political immunity. Ethan's marriage to Ava wasn't about love or even image. It was about laundering corruption into permanence. Once married, Ava would unknowingly sign documents binding her name, and her future children, to a machine that couldn't be dismantled. But Ava had discovered it. And instead of signing, she had chosen to vanish. Lena sat back, the weight of it pressing down. This wasn't just a runaway bride story. This was a revolution. Foreshadowing the dangerous climax, Lena typed her notes into a draft exposé. But before she could hit save, her screen went black. A single message flashed. Stop, or you won't live to see the truth published. Her heart pounded. She grabbed her phone to call her editor, only to find a text waiting for her. From an unknown number. If you really want answers, meet me tomorrow 10 p.m. at the old train station. Come alone. The old train station had been abandoned for decades, its roof sagging like the ribs of a carcass. Broken glass glittered under the moonlight. Lena arrived early, her heart pounding, every shadow a threat. She half expected the SUV men to emerge and drag her away. But at 10:07 p.m., footsteps echoed across the cracked concrete. A hooded figure appeared, slender, cautious, clutching a worn leather sketchbook. Lena's breath caught. She knew that gait even after all these years. Ava? Ava lowered her hood, eyes scanning the shadows. She looked thinner, harder, but alive. For a moment, the years melted away. They were just two girls again, sneaking out of school, whispering secrets into the night. Then reality slammed back. You disappeared, Lena said, voice shaking. You let the world think you were kidnapped. Do you have any idea what this has done? I had to, Ava whispered. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. If I stayed, I'd be trapped forever. And if I just ran away, no one would believe me. Disappearing was the only way to make them look, to make people like you dig. Lena pulled the USB drive from her pocket and slammed it onto a bench. I saw it. The Ward deal. The money, the corruption, all of it. My God, Ava, you had enough to destroy your father, Ethan, maybe half the city. Why not take it to the press yourself? Ava's eyes glistened. Because if I spoke, they'd bury me. Literally. You've seen what happens to people who cross him. I couldn't be the whistleblower. But you, she looked at Lena with a mixture of hope and guilt. You could. Lena's chest tightened. So this was your plan all along? To vanish and dump the truth on me? To use me like everyone else has? No, Ava's voice cracked. I sent the bracelet because I knew you'd understand. Because you're the only person I trust. I'm not asking you to fight for me. I'm asking you to finish what I started, for all the people he's destroyed. For your father. The mention of her father was a knife. Lena turned away, tears burning her eyes. For years she had hated Ava for being complicit, for living in luxury while her family suffered. And now Ava was asking her to help expose the very man responsible. But before Lena could answer, a distant sound shattered the fragile moment, the low hum of engines. Headlights sliced through the broken windows. Black SUVs surrounded the station. Ava's eyes widened. They found me. Men in suits poured in, guns drawn. Richard's men. Maybe Caleb's. Maybe both. It didn't matter. Ava grabbed Lena's wrist, shoving the sketchbook into her hands. No matter what happens, don't let them take this. Inside, there's more than corruption. There's something about me, about us, that will change everything. The words lodged like ice in Lena's chest. About us? Before she could ask, the men closed in. Shouts. Flashlights. The glint of steel. And Ava whispered one last time, "Remember, Lena, the truth will break you." Then chaos erupted. The station was chaos. Shouts echoed off the cracked walls, flashlights slicing through dust, engines rumbling outside. Lena clutched the sketchbook to her chest as men in suits swarmed. Ava was dragged back, her hood ripped away, Richard's men snarling orders. "Get her in the car." Lena lunged forward. "Stop. She hasn't done anything." Ava twisted, locking eyes with Lena one last time. "Remember the book," she mouthed. Then the doors slammed and the convoy of black SUVs roared into the night, carrying her away. Silence fell. Lena stood alone in the ruins, heart racing, sketchbook trembling in her hands. She flipped it open, pages fluttering, sketches of cages, chains, birds in flight. But then she froze. Hidden between the pages were documents, photocopies of birth certificates, DNA test results, notarized letters. Her stomach dropped. At the top of the first page, Vivian Harrington. Her eyes scanned the text. Lines highlighted, names underlined. Then the word struck her like a blade. Vivian Harrington gave birth to twin daughters. One stillborn. The other, Ava Harrington. Paternity questioned. Lena's breath caught. She turned the page. Another file older. Hospital records. Genetic markers. And there it was, written in black and white. Lena Cruz, biological daughter of Richard Harrington. The bracelet on her wrist suddenly felt like a shackle. Her vision blurred as memories crashed in. The eviction. Her father's heart attack. The rage she'd carried all her life. She wasn't just a victim of Richard's empire. She was his blood. Ava had known. She'd left the sketchbook for Lena not just to expose Richard, but to reveal the truth. They weren't just former friends. They were sisters. The enormity of it crushed her. Ava hadn't disappeared to destroy Richard's empire alone. She had disappeared to give Lena the weapon to finish it, because together they were the legacy Richard never wanted. But the files revealed something even darker. Ethan's war deal wasn't just about money and power. It included contingency clauses. If Ava was unable to fulfill her duties, the marriage contract could transfer to her next of kin. Lena's blood ran cold. Richard hadn't just been covering up Ava's disappearance. He had a replacement bride lined up. Foreshadowing the inevitable reckoning, Lena closed the sketchbook with shaking hands. For years she thought she was outside Richard Harrington's world, fighting to expose it. But she had always been inside it, bound by blood, betrayed by silence, tied to a sister who had sacrificed everything to show her the truth. And now the question burned in her chest. Would she run? Or would she step into the fire and bring the empire down, even if it destroyed her too? In the distance, sirens wailed. News alerts pinged her phone. Harrington family denies daughter's kidnapping. Lena stared into the darkness and whispered the words Ava had left her. The truth will break you. And it had. But it had also set her free.